Our foremost consciousness conference, the biennial Tucson Toward a Science of Consciousness, has been reinforcing the separation between subject consciousness and object matter ever since their inaugural conference in 1994, by persistently positing co-founder David Chalmers' so-called hard problem of consciousness. How does consciousness emerge from matter? This question, of course, is based on a massive assumption. An assumption not shared by the man the conference calls the father of consciousness studies, William James. James had warned about the pretense of science to penetrate ultimate questions such as the nature of consciousness by starting with what he called the leanest, lowest, aridest, bare molecular world. His colleague, Josiah Royce, summarizing James's position in a letter to him, anticipated the false start of the Tucson Consciousness Conference with its hard problem assumption. Thinkers who first make molecules and then fall down in mute and holy reverence before the awful mystery of how the molecules ever could make them are far from knowing what it is to cross-question consciousness with any real spirit in their questioning. If I understand you, it is such cross-questioning of consciousness which you want to have done. And for contributors like me to the Tucson Conference who felt that moving toward a science of consciousness was moving away from a deeper understanding of it, a less than real spirited cross-questioning prompted their dropping the toward, as if they had at last arrived at a bona fide object of scientific inquiry, with the hard problem still in play. To be clear, there is a robust science that correlates physical brain states with consciousness. Abundant exceptions, configured under the heading neuroplasticity notwithstanding. Such correlations are the so-called easy problem. But Consciousness Conference Father James had foreseen the fundamentally flawed assumption of the contrasting hard problem with its internal consciousness without objects on one side and external objects without consciousness on the other. Consciousness, says James, evaporated to this estate of pure diaphaneity, does not exist as an isolatable object of study, any more than matter without consciousness does. For a further look at the conference's foundational misunderstanding here, I invite you to check out my brief manifesto published in the Journal of Consciousness Studies and subsequently reprinted online by the good folk of the annual Science and Non-Duality Conference, entitled Science and Consciousness Just Wed. Should this union be annulled? At the core of the essay is a question posed by Father James, a question so profound it resembles a koan, showing what it is to cross-question consciousness with real spirit in the questioning. How, if subject and object were separated by the whole diameter of being and had no attributes in common, could it be so hard to tell in a presented and recognized material object what part comes in through the sense organs and what part comes out of one's own head? So hard to tell is James's answer to those who still believe the dualism assumed by the hard problem is the obvious starting point for investigating reality. A reality, again, in which second sight's precise, foreseen weave of interior thoughts and external objects seems not only weird, but maximally implausible. As opposed to a reality, indeed a prime reality, which allows for precisely the kind of homogenized psychophysical world that maximizes the plausibility of second sight. A reality in which things and thoughts are not at all fundamentally heterogeneous. James depicted such a second sight friendly, homogenized world by the phrase pure experience and the made-up word sciousness, consciousness without consciousness of self. He saw pure experience, sciousness, as immediate experience in its passing, a simple that before it is doubled into 1, a state of mind, and 2, a reality intended thereby. Sciousness is the moment of the sunset before you say, "How beautiful," or the sudden red flash of the cardinal at your window before you identify it as a bird. Or an unexpected sound, as a revered Zen monk taught, the teaching that Alan Watts concludes his classic book, The Way of Zen, with. When Fa Chang was dying, a squirrel screeched on the roof. "It's just this," he says, "and nothing else." A sound as startling, yet unthreatening, as a squirrel screech bursts consciousness into the pure experience of sciousness, insofar as no dualism of being represented and representing resides in the experience. All seeing, tasting, hearing, smelling, touching, thinking, imaging, feeling are reduced to the experience of that screech. If, say, you were watching TV when the squirrel screeched nearby, you could not describe the TV image that coincided with its onset. Likewise, when you bite into a particularly rich piece of chocolate, you lose the sensation of how the chocolate feels in your hand. When you see a shooting star, you stop hearing the crickets. And when the answer to a question you have been puzzling over for weeks suddenly bursts into consciousness, you lose complete contact with all external sensations. James held that sciousness, pure and simple consciousness without a self-brand, was not only a reality, it was prime reality. For sciousness is not distilled from the dualistic constitution of subject-object consciousness, as oil might be from pigment, but rather a dualistic constitution is added to it. Consciousness and objects have no reality, let alone prime reality, in themselves. As James's dear friend and colleague and a mentor to Jung, Theodore Flournoy, put it, sciousness entails that the distinction between self and non-self, implied in the word consciousness, from which we are in a normal state unable to free ourselves, is not primary, but results from a subsequent construction, from a conceptual sorting out and classifying of the primitive experiences. He goes on to say, one can get some idea of this sciousness from the fact that the mystics, and some people on coming out from under the influence of anesthetics, particularly of nitrous oxide, tell of a state in which all sense of the me is abolished, and where there is nothing but the purely objective intuition of something present, the world, God, or whatever it may be. James explicitly identified this homogenized psychophysical world of sciousness, consciousness without consciousness of self, with a pedantic witness, leaving who the knower is wide open, as he says in the concluding pages of his revised psychology textbook. Today's materialist scientific consensus that all so-called matter in the universe originated from an infinitesimal dot might alone suggest that substance-less thought does not so much derive from matter as does what appears as substantive matter derives from thought. But at the very least, we can say with James that matter, as something behind phenomena, is a mere postulate of thought. Or, as fellow cross-questioner Royce put it, the popular assurance of an external world is the fixed determination to make one, now and henceforth. Instances of second sight argue for unfixing that determination, an unfixing that has been in play for several millennia amongst idealists in the East and even in the West. Beginning with Parmenides, the same thing exists for both thinking and being, echoed by Berkeley's "to be is to be perceived," and brought to a crescendo with James's pure experience sciousness. Reluctant guide to his own deepest insights notwithstanding, James wrote, "I have not myself the least objection to idealism, a hypothesis which voluminous considerations make plausible, and whose difficulties may be cleared away any day by new discriminations and discoveries." Today's premier offerer of new discriminations and discoveries on behalf of idealism is Bernardo Castro, a regular columnist for Scientific American magazine and author of many books that help unfix our determination to make an external world. Books that expose the absurdity, or baloney, of a materialism consciousness divide, with consciousness being electrochemical signals unfolding in a kind of theater inside our skulls, supposedly a complex amalgam, and matter, for its part, being a reality that is an amorphous, odorless, soundless, tasteless dance of abstract electromagnetic fields devoid of all qualities of experience. And for those not disposed to let philosophers talk them literally out of their senses, consider this input from the celebrated astronomer-physicist Arthur Eddington. Seen here with Einstein, whose theory of general relativity he first confirmed with his telescope. Every time we step onto a wood floor, we are confirmed in our belief in a solid external world. But, observes Eddington, the plank has no solidity of substance. To step on it is like stepping on a swarm of flies. Shall I not slip through? No. If I make the venture, one of the flies hits me and gives a boost upward again. But if, unfortunately, I should slip through the floor, the occurrence would be not a violation of the rules of nature, but a rare coincidence. A coincidence that Robert Monroe reports encountering, lying in bed in a hypnagogic state. My fingers went through the floor, and there was the rough upper surface of the ceiling of the room below. I felt around, and there was a small triangular chip of wood, a bent nail, and some sawdust. Monroe's extraordinary experience of visceral spaciousness in the floorboards would be banned from a TED Talk today, but it nonetheless evokes one of the most popular TED Talks of all time. That of neuroscientist Jill Bolte Taylor, who in her TED Talk and later book recalled the first moments of a stroke she suffered in a shower. I looked down at my arm and I realized that I can no longer define the boundaries of my body. I can't define where I begin and where I end, because the atoms and the molecules of my arm blended with the atoms and molecules of the wall. And all I could detect was this energy. Energy. And a dentist-turned Tibetan Buddhist whose first mastery included drilling into the hardest part of the human body with a diamond-tipped drill, has become one of our most compelling teachers of practices designed to dissolve our sense of a solid world, the solidity which defines the normal of paranormal. Tibetans, the Buddhist culture most engaged with second sight, have a practice designed to undermine the belief in the heterogeneous world of consciousness and matter that renders it most implausible. Adept at lucid dreaming, they use the illusion of the apparent waking state that one is conscious of as a dream to help them unfix what they see as the illusion of the actual waking state that separates consciousness from matter. For instance, since in a lucid dream, every apparent thing is manifestly consciousness only, there should be no problem to walk through walls. But sure enough, boing, you bang your head against the solid feeling structure. Why? Because, unlike Robert Monroe and Jill Bolte Taylor, we have never experienced walls in any other way. However much matter as something behind phenomena may be an actual illusion, we are conditioned by waking experience to believe otherwise. To uncondition ourselves from this dualistic assumption, Tibetan lucid dreamers practice walking backwards through a wall, because there is no conditioned resistance to that. overcoming the waking state assumption of external matter solidity is not restricted to Tibetans. The primacy of consciousness, indeed timeless consciousness, is also suggested by the deepest paradoxes that the modern religion of physics invokes, and cannot account for with a dualistic materialist worldview. As the great Nobel physicist Richard Feynman put it, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. The same could be said, of course, for second sight, which is why this talk is not about trying to understand it, but only to making it less weird. And the shared weirdness of second sight and quantum mechanics may well be mitigated by the same realignment of consciousness familiar to world religions. Of quantum physics' bizarre observer effect and entanglement, physicist Amit Goswami writes, "These experiments usher a new paradigm of science based not on the primacy of matter, like the old science, but on the primacy of consciousness. Consciousness is the ground of all being, which we now can recognize as what the spiritual traditions call Godhead, Christianity, Brahman, Hinduism, Ein Sof, Judaism, Shunyata, Buddhism, and so on." For those who think this renowned physicist is speaking more as a native Indian than a practicing physicist, consider quantum founding father Erwin Schrödinger's declaration, "The world is given to me only once, not one existing and one perceived. Subject and object are only one. The barrier between them cannot be said to have broken down as a result of recent experience in the physical sciences, for this barrier does not exist." Or David Bohm, whose classic 1954 textbook, Quantum Theory, would later be supplanted by his 2002 non-dual theory, Wholeness in the Implicate Order, and his 2006 non-dual manifesto, The Undivided Universe, in which he declared, "Matter is turning more and more into empty space," and "Quantum field theory treats particles as quantized states of a field that extends over the whole of space." Evolving our understanding of reality from a plurality of individual units of matter, out of which a plurality of individual consciousnesses emerge, to a single field that extends over the whole of space, realigns our worldview to accommodate second sight. As Alexandra David Neal put it in her classic text, Magic and Mystery in Tibet, when one has ceased to consider oneself and others as entirely distinct entities, devoid of points of contact, then telepathy is easily practiced. Russell Targ echoes this in claiming non-dual spaciousness as the realm of both precognition and remote viewing, quoting Dzogchen Buddhist master Longchen Rabchem on incomparable timeless awareness that gives rise to everything, and so there is no other source of phenomena. Making the same point as Royce, he continues, "You are not bound by sensory experiences, but by fixation on them. Sensory appearances and consciousness of them are of one taste in non-dual unity." The East's second-sightable non-dual spirituality can be seen in the foundations of Taoist mysticism, as scholar Harold Ross makes clear. For the Taoists, Shen, spiritual, entails the non-dual principle of the way or Tao, the monistic principle that pervades everything in the universe and provides humans with metaphysical knowledge such as precognition. Second-sightable, non-dual monistic consciousness, promoted by physicists and mystics alike, can accommodate phenomena that common-sense dualism cannot, while accounting for common-sense dualistic perception is ultimately illusory. Common-sense dualism, however, cannot accommodate second sight. This unilateral relationship is what makes second sight a manifestation of prime reality, or what Lawrence Lashan called the clairvoyant reality.